Okay, welcome everyone. This is the Total Worker Health Trends series of webinars from the Center for the Promotion of Health in the New England Workplace, which is one of the NIOSH Centers for Excellence in the Total Worker Health program. We have been funded by NIOSH for 16 years now. We are based both at the University of Massachusetts Lowell and at the University of Connecticut. Here you have contact information and also our website URLs if you want to follow up for more information about the center later on. And I'd like to state that this program is, while it's supported by NIOSH funding, the content is the responsibility of the authors, does not necessarily represent the official views of NIOSH, and doesn't imply endorsement by the CDC or any of the involved organizations. Just a couple of minor details before we get started. Please mute your own audio while you're listening so that we don't have background noise while the speaker is presenting. You can use the chat box to share questions and comments. The webinar is being recorded, so by attending, you're consenting to being recorded. We'll share an abbreviated version of the slides after the presentation is finished. And if you experience any technical issues, please just let us know in the chat box and someone will try to help you out. All right, so we're very excited to have Christine Ipsen as our speaker today. Christine is Associate Professor at the Technical University of Denmark. She's also right now finishing up a sabbatical at Nottingham Trent University in the UK as a visiting senior fellow in the Department of Psychology. Her expertise includes interventions in knowledge work to ensure productivity and well-being in parallel with each other. And she's been doing this work for a long time, well before the pandemic. She was project manager of a Danish national study, a 6-wave study of experiences of working from home, and a qualitative study over 1 year of 13 managers who became distance managers. She's also a member of the Danish Ministry of Occupation's expert panel, which includes unions and other stakeholders, providing suggestions about changes to occupational health and safety legislation in this era of increasing distance work. And specifically during the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, she was project manager. She has been project manager of an international study of experiences of working from home. So we're very excited, Christine, to learn from you about all of your experiences in this area. And please take it away.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I just want to check that the sound is okay now.
Perfect.
Good. Yeah, thank you for also the introduction, and I'm very excited to be able to share some of our work with you this morning and for us this afternoon. Please, if you have any questions, use the chat or just open your microphone, or we can do them later on, or you can always reach out if you want an email or via LinkedIn. So as we just tested the slides, so I will do a presentation of some of the work that we've done over the last years on hybrid remote work and why it's not just about geography. Yeah, so just Laura presented a bit about me, what I've done in my research, just so you understand the background from from the standing point that I present our work is that my key focus has always been how do we organize for both performance and well-being. So looking into work processes, structures, procedures, experiences of work, in particular knowledge work, how does that affect what we do and how does it affect how we feel when we go to work? And that is so nicely presented in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals 8, decent work and economic growth, and also, of course, the focus on SDG-free, the good health and well-being. But because I have an engineer, I'm an engineer by training, I'm educated as an engineer from our technical university, we're also concerned with how do we then organize for this. And we use a systems model like this one by Galbraith. It's consisting of these 5 elements and how it connects with workplaces or organizations, business models. So when we talk about performance, it can both be individual performance, but it can also be organization performance. And that's how we're concerned with how we organize work, how we design interventions, for example, to support the both performance and well-being. So just so you know a bit about the background from where I speak. So having worked with distance management for also before the pandemic, these are just some examples of what we've worked with in my section. I used to be head of section until October last year, where I decided to only focus on my research, and of course also the teaching now that sabbatical is over. So now I have a full focus on my research and teaching, but what I was trying to say is that we've done distance management work before the pandemic, and what I have focused on has also been the use of different technologies. For example, we've used these telepresence robots, as you can see in the bottom left corner. How can we create proximity across distance by being present and being mobile? We've also used social VR. So this is an example on the top left from a reception where we actually were in the Oval Office. You can see we have different avatars here, which are, research colleagues from around Scandinavia meeting each other in the Oval Office using virtual reality. We've worked with the Ministry of Justice in the UK about commuter hubs. How do we bring people in to these different hubs when we have closed ministry offices that was done in central London? They had closed these and brought the offices in surrounding cities of London, so people had shorter commuter time, but also that they would reduce the cost of the facilities. And that, of course, brought about increased use of monitoring, use of digitalization, and also distance management. And we've used different tools like, for example, the table robots or Gather Town, where you can be present in this virtual world. And then came COVID, and we were all sent home. And on the 11th of March, 2 years ago, and we, of course, also here in Denmark, we sent people home to avoid getting sick. And at that point, I was head of our research group section, and we agreed to meet, as we've always done, for lunch, but then it would be virtually, and we chose the platform Slack, and decided then to set up a study on working from home on the first experiences back in mid-March 2020. And these are just to say, since then, I think my key focus, more or less, has been on how do we understand this new way of working and what are the effects. So we can plan and organize it in the best possible way to ensure both the tasks that we're doing and the processes, the performance, and people's well-being, because there are a lot of pros when we work in hybrid work, but also hybrid remote work, but also some challenges. So these are just some of the papers that where we've published what we're working on, and now we have just started up a project. I know it's in Danish, but it's about social capital and distance work, and it's in our municipalities that we are following people for a year about how does the new hybrid remote work affect their sense of justice, collaboration, and trust. So I think that gives you a good picture of what our focus is. So now we are here. It's been 2 years with this new way of working. I know we've tried that before when we had the epidemics with SARS and MERS 20 years ago, but now with the current experiences we have, then I've tried to illustrate here the dilemma or the paradox or these different sides to this or opinions related to working from home or hybrid remote work. And then a few weeks ago, we had this article in Financial Times where it said it's time to admit that hybrid is not working. And what is it actually that we have? Why is it that we have this dilemma? Or why is it that we have these very strong positions when we actually saw 2 years ago a lot of enthusiasm related to have remote work, but now the you can say the atmosphere has changed and the discussions have changed, and it's become a different discussion than it was 2 years ago. Oh yeah, that's a mix of Danish and English. Sorry about that. So what I wanted to share with you is an old model by Fisher and Fisher about what is it actually we talk about when we talk about distance. And we can understand that as 3 dimensions: the geography, time, and culture. And normally when we go to work, to a workplace, like you would go to the office, then we go to, you can say 0.0.0. That's normally how we would see it. We are working at the same place at the same time, and we have the same work culture. But when we move out, and in this case, it's what we would call intra-organizational distance work. Inter-organization distance work is where you work when you work with a customer. But then when we have intra-organizational distance work, then it's about being at different places. So that can be working from anywhere, working from home. It could also be if you, for example, go to another country, or an office like we saw with the commuter hubs. So different places. We can also work at different hours of the day. Some would like to work in the morning, others in the evening. We can talk about shifts. It could also be across time zones like we're doing now. And it can also then be that we have different work cultures. So one thing is to have a culture, same understanding of the culture when we go to the office or to the workplace, but then they change when we go to work in different places. And that means that this is actually the volume that everybody can say embrace or contain when we go to work at different places. And that shows that if we multiply this, let's say we have the responsibility for 15 people, that shows the complexity of 15 different geographies, you can say, and time slots and different work cultures. So this is actually what we're facing, this complexity when we start to discuss how can we introduce or keep the opportunity to have remote work or flexibility in our work. So first I would like to share a bit with you what we learned, and the great thing and also the challenging thing when we talk about this topic is that everybody has experience, everybody has learned something and experienced on their own body what it was to work remotely or work hybrid or work from home. So but I'll share with you some of the work that we have done. So as I told you, we initiated a survey in the very early weeks of the first wave of the pandemic, which was initiated here we went home on the 11th of March, and this was initiated on the 20th of March, where we contacted different colleagues across Europe, but also outside Europe, about setting up this survey. And we collected we gathered, or we set up this survey based on the existing knowledge we had of the hybrid remote work or earlier studies. So we collected this data over the first 8 weeks of the pandemic and got much more than we could anticipate in terms of replies. But it allowed us to have an idea about what people experienced as the key advantages and disadvantages of working from home. And they cluster around 3 advantages and 3 disadvantages. So on the advantage side, we have work-life balance, the comfort of being home, the atmosphere of the home, the routines you can decide for yourself, your social life, and less commuting, of course. And you become more efficient. It's also an experience. You can focus on the task. You have less interruptions, less meetings, etc. And then finally, the third advantage is the control over the work, or over the day. You can take a break when you want, and also the sense of being in more control of the work that you're doing. And then we have the disadvantages, which relate to the home office constraints, feeling isolated, having less contact to people, but also the work uncertainties. What am I actually doing? And is it actually being appreciated? And what should I do next? And finally, inadequate tools is the third disadvantage. That we should actually be able to perform our work. For example, with these tools that we're using today, these platforms, microphones, headphones, etc. So if we don't have them, then we can't do our work. It could also be access to documents, databases, etc. And this got published in this paper. So that's one thing we could take away out of our the first way was that we could actually see that the experience of working from home clustered around these three disadvantages and advantages. Another discussion that we had, and these are based on the Danish numbers, was the experience that people became more productive when they were working from home, but also that there was this discussion about working. That it also the job became more extensified. So we tried to look into the Danish data, and what we saw was that we have a group about 33-36%, and this is more or less stable over the pandemic because we've done this also in Denmark since over in a 6-wave study, that people actually get more work done with less or the same amount of hours. And this is, of course, interesting because who are they and what is it that they do that makes it work for them to work from home? And then we also have people who work more, who get less work done, but work more hours. And these are the numbers from, as I said, from the first part of the pandemic. So these represent people who had children at home at that point. And then we also have those, of course, who work more, who actually saw the opportunity now just to dive in, emerge in their work, get more work done, and also work more hours, basically transfer their commuter time into work hours. And this is actually a concern that we still see, is that when people are working from home, they work more hours. And then, of course, we have the group who work less and also get less work done. But at this point, it sparked a discussion of what are people actually doing? Are they working hardly or are they hardly working? What is it actually what is happening when we can't see each other? And that discussion is still ongoing. And we now also see, which I will come back to, the increased use of these performance monitoring tools. So, yeah, so what we were then concerned with, and as you can see at the bottom, these are the waves that we've done since. That's then a Danish study, is a representative sample of the Danish population that we've done this with over 6 waves. Because we have been interested in finding out, so who does this work for and who it doesn't work for when we allow people to have increased flexibility, that is to work more from home. And what we see is that women have a higher probability of being more effective than men when they're working from home. And also that the older the respondents are, the higher the probability is to be more effective when we are working from home. And managers work more hours and do get to do less when they're working from home. So these are just some indicators of, okay, so who should we then allow to go to the office or to work from home? And just by reading this, we would say, okay, then we should allow women with high seniority to work from home. But since seniority also equals knowledge, then what would then happens to less experienced employees or new people that we just onboarded if we allow people with high experience to work from home or work hybrid or remotely? So if they are allowed, because they can make it work, if they are allowed or have the opportunity to continue, then what would then happen to the other colleagues? And that's another concern that we see, is that how do we bring everybody into the office? At least currently in Denmark, that's the situation that we see, that people with experience prefer to work from home, and those with less experience, they would like to come to the office. A third issue that we've also looked into is how managers experience this new transition. There was early on, there was a discussion about how workplaces could support their employees and use new way of working, and we became curious about, so all the people who need to make this transition work are the first line, or the data managers and middle managers. So how are they actually doing? And we did different studies on this. So one thing was we had the data from our surveys, and then we also did a qualitative study, as Laura also mentioned, where we followed 13 managers, first line and middle managers for a year. had interviews with them every 6 weeks about their work situation and how they experienced becoming a distance manager. And what we see across the whole year is that they have longer work days. It's more time consuming to be present and have that one-to-one interaction that they would normally have if people would come to the office. And this is independent of whether we have restrictions or not, because we also had periods of restrictions the first year or periods where there were less restrictions where people were still allowed to work from home. So they have fewer breaks, they feel tied to the computer. It's very difficult for them to sense people when they can't see them. They can have the experience of being alienated in terms of who am I and they and how do we belong together. They have the sense of being disconnected. And also that the flexibility that they are allowing or people require or wish to have requires a lot of new structures. That could be one-to-one meetings, it can be group section meetings, social gatherings, small events, just to have that sense of belonging. So a distance manager needs to put in a lot more structure or types of meetings and the opportunity to meet each other physically or online when we allow people to work remotely. So there is this change in leadership and the role of being a distance manager, the role of being a manager. So our concern is going forward, also because we are doing currently a study about perceived organization support. And what we see is that they actually sense that they have had very little support from IT and HR, and key support has been from the employees. That if we are transitioning into hybrid remote, as a lot of workplaces are planning to do or are already doing, we see that there's an awareness that we have to support the managers and not leave it to them alone to find new ways to make it work. That this is not just about their own leadership skills in connection with their employees, but also what does this imply for the tasks and achieving the planned goals, the connectivity to other divisions, deliverables, supplies, etc. So these is like you can say rings in water, we would say in Danish. I'm not sure how we say this but these dependencies that we have, how does this affect dependencies across different work groups or divisions? And we cannot leave that to the managers alone. Because what we've seen over the years, from May 2020, when we had the first wave, until November 21, when we had the final wave, you could say that, with COVID, we see this, it's not stable, but we can see there is this difference between the managers and employees. And now we're currently looking into what is this about? Is it about seniority? Is it about gender? Is it about household size? Can we in any way explain why it is that managers find this to be challenging? Because what we've seen is that it looks different depending on where people are, in which country they're managing. So if we go back to the first part of the pandemic, we saw that there was a difference between, for example, German and Danish managers. And now we look into the bottom right corner. And because we were curious about, is this a national thing? Could we use, our national traits? Is that to understand why is this? But it looks like there's something about this relationship when we go to work. And if one of the things that we are looking into is it the type of leadership that we are doing in different countries, where it could be that a Danish manager manages more for relationships and be having these very flat hierarchies, whereas if you go to Germany, there will be more strict hierarchies, and the position is more powerful as a manager than it would be in Denmark, where it's not about position, but it's also about relationships and how you interact with your employees. So, and of course, then there's a discussion about feeling tied to the computer, as we've also seen with the employees. So our, you can say, hypothesis is that one of the reasons why at least managers in Denmark are challenged is because of the connectivity or the interaction with their employees. And that's another reason why we would like to look into this. So well-being is not just about well-being for employees, but also for managers. Because then we teamed up with the Association of Managers and Executives in Denmark. So they are basically organizing, or you can say the Union for Managers in Denmark. And what we see here is that they also get they can figure it out, and they're actually not, then you can say agree or slightly agree to join their current role as distance manager. They're not as motivated. Some of them are, but some of them aren't. So there's like a more balanced view on that one. But they work more hours when they are distance managers, when they work from home. So it's more time consuming. It's basically getting extensified. But they also get the benefits of working from home and become more productive. But if they can choose, they would rather work and manage from the office than working from home. And that's interesting because a lot of surveys, they show that different types of different types of office and knowledge workers would actually prefer, it's more or less the same number, 2/3 would like to continue having the opportunity to work from home or work from anywhere. So managers would like them to come in, and the employees would like to have the opportunity to work remotely. So there is this dilemma that we need to face or have to look into going forward in Danish workplaces. So looking beyond, I guess not most of you, I mean, some of you are probably familiar with this illustration of collective emotions during a crisis. So if you think back about how it was more than 2 years ago, we had this warning about a flu or a virus coming from Asia. We saw a lot of very harsh or disturbing pictures from Italy and Tyrol in Europe. And then we got the impact in February, March, where we saw these increasing number of cases of COVID. And in Denmark, that was the 11th of March. And then over the spring, summer 2020, we experienced, okay, we can do this if we work together. And then we had the idea that now it's over. But of course, we had a lot of these, you can say, trigger events over the coming year and a half. And now we are in a period where we are working through grief. We have a healthcare sector that is highly affected by it. We have young people who are affected by it. Workplaces trying to struggle how to make this work with people with different experiences, and it has affected work in different ways. So now we're in this reconstruction phase. And the reason why I bring this here today is also to be clear on why or how much can we learn from a crisis. Because if we think back from SARS and MERS, when we had the epidemic 20 years ago, we also moved people home. We also wanted people to reduce the risk or lower the risk of being affected and catch the virus. But people also went back to the office after a while. So can we learn something from this period, or was it just a crisis? Whether we can or not, a lot of workplaces have chosen to move forward with this new way of working, allowing people to have that 1-2 days working from home. I talked to a person recently who said that he felt recalibrated, that now he could sense himself and feel what it was to be, you can say, a true knowledge worker or an analyst. So there's something that people have experienced that they want to bring along, even though it was a period of a worldwide crisis. So this is where we are now. These are US numbers. So from the Global Workplace Analytics, Global Workplace Analytics. So yeah, very, very good result for knowledge about experiences and trends in terms of working from home or working from anywhere and telework. So 73% return to the office at least 1 day a week. People feel more included, but also we have a majority who would prefer to work from home full time. People find the virtual meetings less stressful. That could be interesting to hear if you feel the same. Now we have this webinar this morning. 83% say that they have the same productivity level or higher when they're working from home. So that is the perceived performance, which is really important to distinguish between perception and also the real performance. 55% work more hours, 76% believe it makes them happier if they can continue with this, and 70% want to have remote work post-pandemic. So So we face a situation where there is this very nice experience for a lot of people, also the opposite experience for others, and then the discussion about how do we move forward. So, and also this, 3 out of 4 workplaces expect to increase the amount of working from home. So there's definitely something about this. The numbers in the bottom are Danish, and that's just to show that we have the same discussion here. We had the column to the left is the experience before the pandemic, and then during the pandemic, and now after the pandemic is 100. I think it says 160. So, and you can say it's in thousands are anticipating to work from home post-pandemic. And our country is 5 million people. So it's definitely something that is here to stay. And then it's a matter of how can we then make sure that we get the best out of it. Because we see these employee needs or increased flexibility and the possibility to choose themselves. And what we would be interested in is in our work, what we are interested in is how can we maximize these free advantages, the work-life balance, the efficiency, and also the control over the work days. And then there is the other discussion about not so current yet, but it's about the reduced office space. Very early in the pandemic, we saw workplaces which decided to reduce the office space with 20 or 40%, 1 to 2 days per week, and decided to maybe lend out the extra buildings that they would have just to save costs. And they looked into alternative ways of working. How can we reorganize our meeting rooms or our open office space? When we're coming in, how should we be seated? Could it become more flexible? But the discussion is now, is the office then finished? Is it then that we're actually pushing for a non-workplace? And what is actually the advantage of coming to the office? We have unions discussing the right to go to work. If there is a very, very strong wish from employees to work from home, then can you then actually expect to have a desk and a seat in your own, maybe your own office or your own desk and seat when you come into the office? And how do we understand these new managerial roles? So there is this again. There are some opportunities, both in terms of cost savings and people's preferences, but on the other hand, how do we then organize for this in the best possible way so we continue to ensure the performance and the goals, the tasks that we have. And this is an old illustration. If you look into some older OECD reports, they have this illustration about the work efficiency and teleworking. And I think it's important to bring this along in this discussion. It's really hard to find, at least I haven't been able to find the studies behind this one, but if we agree that this is how it works, that we have an efficiency increase in the beginning when we work from home, but after a while there will be a decrease. Then, so we have an inverted U curve. Then how do we organize for that in the best possible way? And here we believe that we can use, for example, these advantages and disadvantages to see, okay, as long as you have the efficiency increase, as long as you can get into flow and you get the best out of working from home, then you can work from home when it fits the task. But when you feel isolated and you don't really know what to do, or you're missing what you need to do your work, then you go back into the office. So it's more in terms of rotation than it is about having fixed days of coming to the office or the workplace Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, Thursday. Because there's this other study that shows that most of us, we find that we have more energy in the beginning of the work week. So that is Tuesday is 35 and Monday is 25. So if we also have the opportunity to choose ourselves, if this is true, then the most of us would probably like to go to the office late in the week. And we actually had a case on this in Denmark where we have these traditions in many workplaces that we would either have breakfast Friday morning, or people would go to like a bar or have something to drink late in Friday afternoon. But it's no fun to have a Friday beer or a Friday morning breakfast if it's Thursday or Wednesday. So most people would actually like to get to the office on Fridays, just before the weekend. But if we have a reduced workspace of 20 or 40%, then we can't have everybody in on the same day. So there's also about who should come in and who can't come in, and how do we decide who can and who can't come in on which days. So that's definitely something of concern to bring along. What we've also seen is that in Europe, we have this digitalization index where the European Union, they map all countries in Europe on their digital skills, on these 5 parameters: connectivity, human capital, etc. And this year we're actually number 1. Last year we were number 3. And then if you take in the other end of the diagram, then we have Italy. So we were curious about, okay, if we take countries at different ends of the scale here, or the illustration of the diagram, then what do we then see? Because we also have prior experience of working from home in Denmark. So we could anticipate that we would actually be well equipped to be able to work from home. But what we see when we compare across countries is that we actually felt we were the population that felt most isolated. So even though we have high digital level and the experience of working from home, we actually felt that we were more constrained by our home office, and we also felt more isolated, and that was independent on age and gender. So having a strategy in Europe and in European countries about increasing digitalization, we also have to just be aware that it doesn't necessarily come with a lot of opportunities. It could also come with some challenges in terms of well-being and what will happen to people's work lives if they are being, you can say, forced to work from home 1 to 2 days per week because we are reducing the office space. So what we see now, current discussions, at least what we see in Denmark, is the new management role and the new tasks about how we can manage these different requests. Most workplaces have pushed the decisions about how to do this in practice to the daily management. And that's currently where it's being discussed. How do we implement this in practice? And that means that we have seen a lot of discussions about developing skills in terms of being more effective in communication, performance management, building teams and how to collaborate, but also to get guidance on how do you ensure people in terms of, ensuring inclusion and diversity, engagement, etc. So there is this ongoing discussion about the daily manager's role and tasks, where they also need to learn how to plan, organize, lead, and control these well-known tasks that now need to be moved, or at least to cover the hybrid remote work. So these are one of the discussions that we also see in our work. Then we see another discussion is the big I and the smaller we, or the big we and the smaller I. Because a question that we meet over and over again in our work is, why should I come to work? Why should I not work as in doing work, but come to the office? Why should I come in? Some people have the sense that they become more equal. It's being more democratic, or it's an opportunity to work together in new ways when they work digitally. So we see these new dilemmas between people with this autonomy versus the self-management, this power struggle between who decides for me, and also a dilemma between employee needs and employer expectations. And it all circles around this we. Why should I come to work? Why do people need me? If it works well for me and I can do my work, I become more efficient, it affects my well-being in a positive way, then why should I come in? And the employers or the workplaces say, we need you, and we have new people to onboard, we have maybe a restructuring, we have a team to build, we have customers to meet, or colleagues. So there is this ongoing discussion between the I and the we, and that's why I put in this. I don't know if it works well in English, but what I'm trying to say here is if individualism has taken the community or the collective, work collective, as we would say, a scalp. I don't know if you can say this in English, but in Danish it means that we have now for so many years worked with the idea and to allow the differences among people, the differences, to respect the differences that we have and respect the different ways of working and embrace that. But maybe because we've gone down that, you can say, road or this perspective, then it actually has an impact on when we work together, that we have become more focused on ourselves than we are actually on the people or on our colleagues. And why is it that we should come back to the office? Another discussion that we currently see is the performance management, because during the pandemic, there was an increase in the use of these performance measurement tools. So we've adjusted a lot of expectations and goals during the pandemic in terms of projects and deadlines and deliverables. And some have been more productive and sensed that they were, and others have felt that they were, and others have not. So now when we have people in these hybrid remote settings, how do we then assess performance and result going forward? How do we allow for the flexibility, but at the same time, we have a need for visibility, responsibility, and how do we show trust? And these are just some examples of some user activity monitoring tools. So there's this one called Sneak, which can basically open the camera without permission. And we have Protoscore, which it traces the performance on a person's computer and connects it with the salary, so you can go and have a look at those websites. And then there's of course the well-known one by Microsoft, the Viva, which also trace our performance and is described as a self-management tool, but also gathers data across people and have these management reports. So we see you can say when we work digitally, because that's where, of course, it's the essence of telework, then there's also at least that's what we see in Denmark, a backside or a discussion about what happens to all the data and how are they being used in a management setting. And can we control what's being, how is this being done, and how can we get access to what the data is being used for? What we also see is a new discourse, and that's also what I said in the beginning. It's not just about geography. We tend to talk about the flexibility as a benefit, but what happens to people who can't work remotely, where the work actually demands them to stay in the office because of a customer or a citizen or service that needs to be done? So we're discussing, what we're looking into currently is this new discourse of work, how is it actually we talk about the workplace? What does it mean to go to work for us? Not with us, sorry, for us. How do we talk about this as a collective and not just as individuals that do work? So what is the purpose of the workplace? How does work contribute to the overall goal? And that's why I also say that what we've worked with is, we see hybrid remote as a means and not as a goal in itself, because it's a way of working. It's not a goal in itself to work hybrid remotely. It has to have a purpose in terms of the tasks that we're doing. So what is it used for? Why do we actually have hybrid work? What is the purpose of this? So we're allowing for flexibility, and we can see it works well for some people, but what is actually the value that it generates? So we have management and leadership forefront, upfront. We have to be very explicit about what it is that needs to be done. So expectations need to be aligned. We could also discuss, people show up in connection with consolidation or reorganization, new hires, etc. So that's really where we see that this is a way of working, and where we have to be very explicit about when is it that we bring people in, because it has a purpose. And then it's also about measuring the effect. So one thing is that we perceive ourselves to be more it's better for us in terms of well-being and also our performance, but how is it also good for the, you can say, the collective well-being and for the collective work and for the collective performance. So it's not just about the I, it's about the we. So one task for you could have in your work is what should be in a job description? What type of workplace are you actually offering? If people are saying, oh, I would like to come and work with you, then what would you actually tell them? You know, and they will say, okay, yeah, we're allowing for some flexibility, but overall we want it's office first. Or is it that it's purely remote? But then why is it purely remote? So that could be an exercise. What should be in a job description? So this is the dilemma that we are in, to be or not to be in the office. Recently there was a headline in the UK that now some workplaces decide to pay people to come into the office, and they're not allowing for flexibility. And other places they're discussing what happens to people when they come into the office and become more unhappy, as you can see in the Apple example in the bottom right corner. And then last week there was, and maybe you've already seen that, Elon Musk had sent out an email to his employees that he saw this as if people were working from home or remotely, he actually saw it as people had chosen to resign. And also that Tesla would never been the success that they are if people were working remotely. So there's really then the essence of the flexibility is who owns my time and how do we negotiate where we work and how do we organize for that so it meets all purposes, both the workplace purpose and also people's own preference and purpose. Because what we see is that there is a majority that would like to continue working from home. We also have, these are the numbers we had in the beginning, we also see a large group for those where it doesn't work. We've also seen that in our continuous study that there is a big group, both young people or in other functions that, or young people, but also functions where it doesn't work. So even though there is this appreciation of it, there's also this concern. And in the EU, we're discussing this, the right to disconnect, to make sure that we don't see an extensification of work where people actually end up working way too many hours day after day. So here at the end of the webinar, some learnings and implications that you can consider is why should we do this? What is the purpose of it? How does it support our overall strategy? It's not about geography and moving the work just to another place. It's a new way of working, and how does that then support what the key tasks are? Does it actually benefit everyone, or is there a backside to digitalization that we have maybe anticipated that could be in terms of isolation? So how can we make sure digitalization has a benefit to everyone? As I said, is it a goal or a means? And it could be a way to retain and attract talent, but at the same time, we can also have maybe isolation. So how can we benefit from this going forward? And then, because so many people across the world saw this as a possibility and an opportunity to improve their work-life balance, become more efficient, could that be one of the keys to reduce stress, which is still an unsolved problem? And then how do we organize for that going forward? So this is telework in its essence. Technologies allowing new ways of working, go to the right, affecting our well-being and performance. It affects the role of the office and overall our sustainable work in terms of new ways of working, and potentially also how we can ensure good health and well-being. Thank you for your time, and this is part of our team.